Hey Nick, good to catch up with you again. Thanks for being part of our Subscription Matters special episode. And we're going to be talking about subscription monetization. So I think it'll be great to get some of your insights and things that we'd like to know. So wanted to just ask you some very general questions. And before we start, maybe if you could just share with us a little brief about who you are and what you do and what you're all
Okay, well,
about.
thank you, Jack. Thanks for the intro. Thank you for the invite. Pleasure to be with you here today. Maybe a little intro about me. I've been in the subscription world and the pricing world and the advertising world probably for somewhere between 5 to 10 years now. Pricing a little bit longer. I come from a pricing consultancy background, but I've had the pleasure of working across monetization and business models, I guess, for 10 to 12 years across so many different sectors. And yeah, lately, I think probably the last few years, it's been really focusing on subscriptions, which I think is a model that a lot of companies are turning to nowadays,
Mhm.
and finally understanding, that it can unlock, I think, a lot of value for both for the consumers and for businesses as well on the way forward. Um, so yeah, that's me in a nutshell. I have worked as well in I think the thought leadership space you would call it. So we obviously have met at Zuora before in our
Yes,
past lives.
got a bit of
Um,
history here.
so yeah, while you were selling, I was doing the thought leadership work in terms of subscriptions, working with companies that were about to launch, helping them with their business strategies, either pre-launch or post-launch, in terms of looking at MVPs and things like that. So a very very interesting space, which allowed me actually to work with a lot of clients on problems that can be quite interesting to solve.
I know you've got a very varied background, and having worked with you, I know you've worked in technology, retail, media, and manufacturing. So you've got a lot of industries. So interesting to talk to you. As you know, subscription is a big industry, and according to McKinsey, the global subscription industry is expected to reach 2 trillion 2025. What does that really mean from your perspective? Does that hold any
Yeah, I don't
truth
I don't
or?
know how to count to 2 trillion, so it sounds like a big number, right? I think it's hard to actually really imagine what that means, right? Like, you're talking with so many figures. What I think, to translate it in terms that people can understand you. While I was working at Zora, we used to publish. They still do today, but they have something that they call the Subscription Economy Index. And what they do is, because they're a billing platform, they have a lot of subscription companies that transact through them, and they're able to kind of measure the revenue that those companies are growing year on year on. And so when looking at the past decade, the subscription economy index has grown at a rate of 17% year on year. So that's like, if you think about compounded growth over a decade, this has tremendous value that's been created for all these companies. So yeah, the industry, the subscription industry, if you can call it an industry, is definitely growing towards like a big chunk of the overall economy. But I think what it means for companies that are listening in is that actually, what it means for them is that it can accelerate the growth that they can see.
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess that's what attracts a lot of businesses to look at subscription. And who doesn't want that predictable recurring revenue? You've got $100 million in the bank in 2023, and then in 2024, you've got to please the business, the shareholders. So you're going to add another 40% on top of that. So yes, definitely. But if you can share some of your insights around um, why do you think it is so important for businesses to consider pivoting uh, based on the traditional product or service type businesses?
Yeah. So I mean, it's there's several reasons why as a business you'd consider it. I think the first question is where you are at in terms of the overall maturity of your business.
Mhm.
So as you said, you in your question, what I hear is that there's an element of transition. So I'm hearing, if you're not a subscription native, why should you consider that? So we're gonna park, like those SaaS and Silicon Valley kind of base companies, which are probably mostly operating on that model for a second, and focus more on either companies that are exposed to recurring revenue today, whether they're utilities, telco, media, something like that, or if this is not necessarily your core business, you may be a manufacturer or automotive or something along these lines, right? So the first thing to that would interest you in a subscription model, as mentioned, is growth, right? So the subscription economy index is one of the I guess the kind of key data points that we can refer to, where you could say, well, we
Mhm.
know that subscription businesses tend to grow at a faster pace. The latest figures show that it's nearly 4 times. Subscription companies grow at nearly 4 times the pace of traditional businesses, and that's based on a comparison that they make to an index like the S&P 500 or the ASX, for example. So not you necessarily your small businesses, but big corporates. So fast growth is definitely one of them. The second thing that could push you towards the transition is the resiliency. And what I mean by that is when things are good,
Yep.
you're growing, you may actually look at how you can tweak things a little bit, but changing your business model is maybe a little bit extreme. If there's this old adage, if it ain't broke, don't fix it.
Mhm.
And I think a lot of businesses live by that, right? So you wouldn't consider a complete change of business if you're everything's going well. But if things are not going well, then you're looking at, okay, so what are the businesses that are doing well in this economic environment? And so in a way, we are lucky enough from a data perspective that we can refer to a recent crisis, which is the COVID times. And if you look at the
Yeah,
COVID
it's
times,
almost like a different
yeah,
era
I
now,
mean,
right? It's
I'm talking
completely
about it in
changed
the
now.
past tense. Like
Yeah.
there's still obviously a lot of cases worldwide, but if you look at it from an economic shock perspective, it's pretty much past tense, because we're no longer all closed. Pretty much a lot of business have resumed, although some have been considerably impacted. But from a resiliency perspective, what that period of time allowed us to look at is what are the businesses that are doing well and those that aren't. Um, and again, I'm going to quote Zora, but this is simply because we did a lot of research in the Subscribe Institute there. But there was a fascinating figure, which we had in 2021, when we asked businesses if they were still growing, slowing down, if they were going backwards on revenue, and 85% of subscription businesses reported that they were still growing. And I think there was actually 15% of them, or between 15 and 20% of them, that said they were actually accelerating their growth, right? Like, so if you think about like media, a lot
Mhm.
of them had more subscription sales than ever before. Like this is when you had Disney launching, you had Paramount Plus, you had all these kind of like businesses that were going out there. And if you were stuck at home, you're probably going to subscribe
Yeah.
to more things that you wanted, right? So resiliency is one of them. And if you think about it, you touched on recurring revenue, Jack. um, the fact is that you have this ongoing service, that access that you keep having, and if there's not a reason for you to cancel your subscription, if you whether you're a business or,
Mhm.
or an individual, if you're still seeing value from it, then you're likely to keep it. And that's why subscription businesses tend to do well during those kind of times. um
And just
so
on that, Nick,
yeah,
with that value, right? That's really a very tricky word, um, because there's a lot of subscription services around there. How important is this personalization? And how do you keep that loyalty? How do you keep that customer from churning? I think that's really the challenge. And for businesses that is already in subscription, and for the newcomers, what are the traps, and how do they best navigate this?
Yeah, yep. So I guess that's another area entirely. And but the answer again to this one, I think, is it depends. It depends on several things. The first one is, are you a business or are you a person, right? Like, are you in the B2C world or the B2B world as a subscription company?
Yeah, good point.
I think in B2B, it's not uncommon to talk about customization. You would know that when you're dealing with your clients, they'll probably all have the same kind of thing, which is, Jack, we're not like your typical client. We have a very different business, probably from whatever you've seen before. That's not necessarily true, but everyone thinks that they're pretty special, right? So the point is, like, when you're dealing with B2B, you always have to deal with a certain way of doing business. And so, to a certain degree, there's an amount of customization, especially in the enterprise world, that is expected, right? When you're
Mm.
looking at small B2B, you can have like platforms and things that manage most of your needs. But as you grow into the bigger end of town, there's going to be expectations of you to, actually, to a certain degree. Some companies that are very successful, what they do is they bring on their key clients to help them with their roadmaps, right? So I've sat on some of these meetings where, so a company that is worth a significant portion of the revenue will tell you, um, this is how we would like your products to evolve in the coming couple of years. Can is this an innovation that you see yourselves going into? And of course, if the client is worth a certain amount of the portfolio, you tend to listen. But I think that's key in subscription more than any other area. What's very important about subscription is that, contrary to transactional companies, your success is predicated on your ability to have recurring revenue. So that means you need to be able to constantly demonstrate to your clients that you're bringing them value. And as a result, you need to innovate. And that means that you need to listen to your customers and hear what they want in order to bring that value to them, right? So of course, I think in general, like, I come from the marketing world. Every marketer will tell you that you need to listen to your customers, right? Like, that's one of the 101 of marketing. In subscription, it's 10 times more true, because if you don't listen, you won't be able to translate that into like value for the customer.
Yeah, look, and let's just try and process that for a moment, because there's a lot to unpack with what you're saying there, Nick, and that listening to the customer and being able to keep them and retain them, make sure that they're actually still uh, very keen to use your products and services. That's not easy, right? Like, I mean, you could share some of your experiences when you go out there and create a new product and service, and then you have some initial interest, then it starts to wane or decrease. You've got to keep them interested. You've got to keep them subscribing and wanting to use your product, to the point they forget that they're getting X number of dollars debited from their credit card each month.
Yeah.
Would you say, from your experience and obviously from where we both come from, is that continuous process of improvement that companies need to really embrace?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, to be honest, like, if you look at the what really propelled the subscription era, subscriptions have been happening for a long time, right? Like, it goes back to early media days where you could just subscribe to a magazine or a newspaper or something, right? But obviously, for a long time, I don't think that the field was evolving much, and it's only in the late 2000s that you had companies like Adobe and Salesforce and all these kind of, like, now giants that basically disrupted what used to be a licensing software industry into what is now software as a service. So I think there is definitely that element of about listening to your customer, bringing about this change, this constant innovation. Because if you look at what they were able to do, those kind of like software providers, they transition from giving you a CD that you would install on your premises, and that basically was how you would operate until you got the update, maybe like 3-4 years later, to actually saying like, well, now you don't have to buy a software every so often whenever you renew. You just pay us a yearly fee, and we'll keep bringing you the updates as a subscriber. So I think that kind of changed the notion of what it means to subscribe to things. We're now in an era where subscription doesn't mean that you're just charging me for a recurring service. I think as a subscriber, you talked about customization. That's potentially one of them, but you expect certain innovation, service improvements, to happen. So if as a business you don't evolve and you don't bring better services to your customers, you can bet that your competitors are going to steal them from you.
Or you can simply lose them if you drop the ball, if your finger is not on the pulse. So if it's not in the competition. So the other thing I wanted to ask you is that because subscription pricing can be complex, what strategies can companies employ to communicate the value of their offerings effectively and transparently to potential subscribers or existing customers for potential upsells?
Um, you're throwing me very easy questions, right? Like this is a big topic in itself. Um,
We
I
can
mean,
do another session on that next time.
yeah. And I'm going to keep it top line, but feel free to ask me to go a bit further in some topic if you want me to. But essentially, the first thing is the subscriptions in itself are not necessarily a charging model. I think that's a myth that's out there, that you've got a traditional way of selling stuff, and then you've got the subscription way of selling stuff. It's a simplification. To a certain extent, it's an easy way to think about things, but it's a bit of a myth, and you could find examples that contradict that. And what I mean by that is you have free subscriptions, right? So you could very much have pricing models out there where you subscribe to a service for free, and actually you then pay based on usage of certain things. So a subscription in itself doesn't mean recurring revenue if you don't set it up that way. I think people think of it that way, but it doesn't necessarily need to hold, right? Which can be quite confusing for people. But in order to keep it simple, usually yes, you have subscriptions that are what happens is you pay to access a service, and that payment can happen on a monthly basis, quarterly basis, yearly basis. In B2B, it can even be several years of contracts. That doesn't mean that it's just a one fee and you forget. What can happen, and the more sophisticated the companies out there, basically, the more sophisticated the pricing models you can find. Which is why probably in SaaS you can find some of the smartest things out there. But
Yeah, absolutely.
um, they have evolved from like a pretty simple pay as you go monthly, to you can have charges per seat, where as your volume of seats increase, you get a marginal discounts. You have usage base, where
Oh
for a
wow,
certain
that
amount of data you get tiering systems. And
yeah, you've just unpacked another lot there, and yeah, I don't want to go too deep. Actually, I think it's worth another session around pricing and monetization strategies, and I think that's really an important aspect of this with subscription businesses.
but listen, I think just to kind of have a simple message, what I always advise companies that are about to launch a subscription when it comes to pricing is,
Mhm.
don't try and over complexify your
Thank you.
your
I
model from
think
the start, right?
that's a good
Is that
message.
is that what you want me to say?
That's a good message.
So don't there's plenty of stuff you can do, but the point is, usually, and actually if you look at most successful subscription companies out there, they launch with something that's very simple. And very often because they have one subset of customers, and as they start expanding into B2B, for example, or enterprise, or their segmentation becomes more complex, they'll say, well, basically the model that we have probably doesn't cater to all our customer segments, and we need to change our offering. And so when you move from launching to the next stage of scaling up, that's usually when you start questioning your business model and finding things that are a little bit more interesting from a
Yeah.
pricing perspective. But until then, I would say usually keep it simple, right?
No, thanks, Nick. And I'd love to ask you more questions because you've mentioned a lot of key drivers and initiatives that really help subscription businesses and industries to thrive. If I relate back to the statistics in the report that you mentioned, why they're almost growing 4 times at the rate of the traditional companies. Before we finish off, there's a couple of more questions I wanted to focus on, which is around the Asia Pacific region. Um, how do you see the progress in this region when it comes to subscription compared to the US, North America, and Europe?
Yep. Um, so keeping with the subscription economy index as a reference point in terms of data, this year the growth. Well, sorry, this year. What I mean is 2022. If you look at the full calendar year 2022, APAC had a subscription economy index growing 11.8% year on year, which is again
Okay.
much. If you compare it to a typical company growth, you're probably talking about 3-4% usually. So again the rate is much faster. So first message is the if you look at the shape of growth, yes, absolutely, there's still something there in terms of subscription. It's growing faster than traditional businesses in APAC. It holds true. Secondly, though, and this comes from experience talking with a lot of business in the region, I have had, I guess, disappointing conversations where I find that a lot of businesses tend to be a bit conservative, right? Like I love to talk to businesses that like to innovate and try new things, and I find that most of them
They
tend to
take a
be
little
either in
bit more
Europe.
risk. Is that
Yeah,
what you
take
mean?
more risk, right? And a lot of them tend to be in Europe or the US, unfortunately, right? So I feel like there's still a culture
Oh,
here.
interesting.
There's still a culture where a lot of people want to know that there are people in the US or Europe that have done it before. And I don't know why that is. I think it's obviously risk avoidance at the core, right? Like trying to seek some reassurance. But you've got lots of conditions, economic conditions that are ripe in APAC for subscription models, even for disruption, right? Like for manufacturers to try a new thing. I mentioned automotive earlier. That's an area that I think China, for example, is clearly taking a lead in. And obviously, I think subscription and automotive will go hand in hand in the future. But so what I mean is like we should be a region that should be disruptive. I think there's a lot of young businesses. There's a lot of small businesses actually in this region more so than in other regions. So it's disappointing to see that I think we're playing laggard to the US and Europe, and it doesn't have to be that way. I think it just takes more innovation from companies. And I'm not saying, by the way, that there's no disruption. I think we're very lucky, especially in Australia, that we have unicorns here that are doing like fantastic work.
Yeah.
Um, and a lot of them are using subscription as a business model. I just wish there were more of them.
Yeah. Well, look, we're running out of time, unfortunately, but it's look, you've actually shared a lot of great insights. Um, and I will use your last comments there for the businesses in this region, is to take a little bit more risk. And innovation means trial and error. So I think that that's something that we're gonna hopefully, that people listening in can really embrace that. But what I'd like to do is thank you, Nick, and I'd like to invite you next time for a little bit more. Let's unpack some of these things that you've mentioned. Maybe let's talk about maturity assessments and the ROIs and more around pricing and monetization. But I just wanted to thank you and look forward to connecting again in the next few weeks.
Thank you very much, Jack. It was a pleasure.
Excellent.